If you think about human height, it's easy to see it as just a number on a measuring tape, something you either wish was different or never really question. But when you zoom out and look at it from a survival perspective, especially going back to our caveman days, height wasn't just a cosmetic trait. It actually influenced how people lived, what roles they naturally leaned toward, and even how likely they were to survive in certain environments. Back then, there wasn't a perfect height. There were just trade-offs. Every body type had advantages and disadvantages depending on the situation, the climate, and the demands of survival. And, interestingly, even today those same trade-offs still exist, just in less obvious ways. Let's start with shorter individuals. In a prehistoric environment, being shorter actually had some serious advantages. Energy efficiency was a big one. Food wasn't guaranteed. You didn't have supermarkets or regular meals, so your body had to survive long periods without eating much. A smaller body generally needs fewer calories to function, which meant shorter people could often survive longer during food shortages. On top of that, shorter stature made you more agile in dense forests or rough terrain. Imagine moving through thick woodland, squeezing through narrow gaps between rocks, or chasing small animals into tight spaces. A lower centre of gravity also made it easier to change direction quickly, which would have been useful both in hunting and avoiding predators. There's also the aspect of stealth. A smaller frame is naturally easier to conceal. In a world where you might be both predator and prey, depending on the moment, being harder to spot could make a real difference. You can think of it almost like built-in camouflage through scale alone. But of course, there were downsides. In physical confrontations, height and reach matter. A shorter person would generally be at a disadvantage in direct combat with a taller rival. Reach affects striking distance, leverage, and even intimidation. If two individuals were competing for dominance or resources, size could play a psychological role too. Bigger often meant stronger, or at least perceived that way. Fast forward to modern life, and some of these traits still carry over in surprising ways. Shorter individuals still tend to have lower calorie requirements, which can make maintaining body weight easier in environments where food is abundant, but discipline matters more than scarcity. Shorter people also tend to experience less strain on joints over time, especially knees and hips, because there's generally less mechanical load with every step. There are studies that suggest shorter individuals may have slightly lower risk in certain health categories, like some cardiovascular strain patterns, though this is complex and influenced by many other factors like lifestyle and genetics. In crowded environments, shorter stature can also be an advantage in mobility. Think of packed public transport, dense cities, or moving through tight indoor spaces. On the flip side, in modern society, height can influence perception. Taller individuals are often perceived as more authoritative or commanding, especially in leadership or professional settings. That doesn't mean it's fair or accurate, but perception plays a role in human interaction, and that bias exists in everything from job interviews to social dynamics. Now moving into average height, this is where things get interesting, because average isn't just a middle point statistically, it's often a balance point evolutionarily. In caveman terms, being of average height likely meant you had the most flexibility. You weren't extremely specialized in one direction, but you weren't disadvantaged either. You had enough size to defend yourself and compete for resources, but you still maintained decent energy efficiency and agility. Think of it as a survival all-rounder build. In unpredictable environments, adaptability is key. If the climate changes, if food sources shift, if your group migrates, being balanced physically could be more valuable than excelling in one extreme trait. Average height individuals would likely have been well suited for group living as well. In early human tribes, cooperation mattered more than individual dominance most of the time. So being physically capable without being overly energy demanding or slow could make someone more versatile in roles like hunting support, gathering, tool making, or childcare. The downside is that average often means not having a standout physical advantage. In situations where extreme traits matter, like direct combat or deep endurance tasks, average builds might not excel in either direction. You're competent in many areas, but rarely dominant in one. In modern life, this balance is still visible. Average height tends to be associated with fewer extreme advantages or disadvantages. Clothing fits more easily. Environments are designed around average human proportions, from desks to cars to doorways. In a sense, modern society is literally built for this group, which is a hidden advantage on its own. Now let's talk about taller individuals. In prehistoric times, being tall often meant longer reach, greater stride length, and a more imposing physical presence. In hunting scenarios, reach can matter a lot. Whether you're throwing a spear, using early tools, or engaging in close combat, having longer limbs gives mechanical advantages. You can generate more leverage and cover more distance with movement. Taller individuals also tend to have greater absolute strength potential, simply due to longer muscle fibers and larger frames, although this depends heavily on nutrition and development. In confrontations, intimidation is another major factor. A taller figure standing upright would naturally appear more dominant, which could reduce the likelihood of conflict escalating in the first place. Stride length is another underrated advantage. Covering more ground with each step means that in open terrain, taller individuals could move more efficiently over long distances when speed is sustained rather than explosive. But there's a catch. Larger bodies require more energy. In a world where food is not guaranteed, that's a major disadvantage. If resources are scarce, a taller individual is under more pressure to find consistent calories just to maintain basic function. That could make survival during droughts or winter periods more difficult. There's also agility. In dense environments like forests or rocky terrain, a larger frame can be more cumbersome. Lower branches, narrow gaps, and uneven ground all become slightly more challenging to navigate quickly. And in colder environments, while larger bodies can retain heat better, they also require more fuel to keep warm. In modern times, many of these traits still show up in different ways. Taller individuals are often perceived as more authoritative or leadership-oriented, even in situations where height has nothing to do with skill. This can influence social dynamics in subtle ways. Athletically, height can be a huge advantage in sports like basketball or volleyball, where reach and vertical coverage matter. In other areas like sprinting or gymnastics, however, a taller frame can sometimes be a disadvantage due to longer limb rotation and increased difficulty in controlling movement precisely. Health-wise, taller individuals may have both advantages and disadvantages, depending on the system being considered. Some research suggests slightly higher risks for certain conditions, while also showing advantages in lung capacity or reach-based physical tasks. So when you look at all of this together, what's the actual takeaway? Height isn't a better or worse trait in a universal sense. It's a trade-off system shaped by survival needs. In caveman times, survival wasn't about being the strongest or fastest in every category. It was about fitting into a chaotic environment where food, safety, and movement all mattered at the same time. Different heights gave different tools for that survival puzzle. Shorter builds leaned toward efficiency, stealth, and agility. Taller builds leaned toward reach, presence, and power potential. Average builds sat in the middle with adaptability and balance. And even now, in modern life, those ancient trade-offs haven't disappeared. They've just shifted into different contexts. Instead of hunting and avoiding predators, it's now about health, perception, environment design, and social interaction. What's interesting is that no matter your height, Your body is basically a compromise that evolution was willing to accept because it worked well enough for survival. There was never a perfect human height, just different strategies for different environments. And maybe that's the real point. Height isn't something that defines capability in a strict sense. It just changes the way you interact with the world around you.